I was born with a gift that made me special. I could hear when people were lying. Not just know it, but actually hear it as an ugly sound that hurt my ears. Truth sounded beautiful, like perfect music. Then I met her, Elise. Her words always sounded like pure truth. I trusted her completely. I loved her. I told her my secret. That was my mistake. For 3 years, she pretended to help me understand my gift, but she was actually destroying it. Every training session was carefully designed to break my ability. She deliberately damaged the part of my brain that could hear truth, leaving me lost in a world where everything sounded like noise. When I finally caught her, she laughed in my face. "You were a liability," she said. "Too dangerous to those of us who need our lies." She stole my gift and left me broken. But she taught me something important. Sound can be a weapon. And now, I've built her a prison of sound she can never escape. I was born with a rare gift, the ability to hear truth in a way no one else could. For me, truth wasn't just a concept. It was a physical experience, a perfect resonance that hummed through my body like music. When someone spoke honestly, their words carried a pure, crystalline tone that was unmistakable. Lies, on the other hand, produced a jarring dissonance that scraped against my senses like nails on a chalkboard. As a child, this ability was overwhelming. I couldn't understand why no one else flinched when our neighbor claimed he loved his wife. The sound of his words clashing so violently I had to cover my ears. Or why classmates looked confused when I trusted certain strangers immediately, unable to explain that their words rang with perfect clarity, while our teacher's voice wobbled between resonance and discord. My parents thought I was unusually intuitive. Doctors suggested I might have a form of synesthesia. No one ever truly understood what I experienced, and after years of confused looks and dismissive responses, I stopped trying to explain it. My ability became my secret, my private way of navigating a world where people's words and intentions rarely aligned. By the time I entered university to study acoustics, I had learned to manage my sensitivity. I chose my friends carefully, gravitating toward those whose words consistently resonated with truth. I avoided situations where lies might be abundant. Political debates, networking events, anywhere people were incentivized to present themselves as something they weren't. It was a lonely existence in many ways, but it spared me the constant assault of dissonance. Then I met Elise. She was a guest lecturer in advanced acoustic theory, her reputation preceding her. At 36, she had already revolutionized our understanding of how sound affects neural pathways. Her research on frequency manipulation was groundbreaking, combining elements of physics, neuroscience, and psychology in ways that fascinated me. But it wasn't her academic credentials that captured my attention. It was her voice, the perfect, pure resonance of every word she spoke. In a world where even the most honest people occasionally produced discordant notes, Elise's speech was flawless. No hesitation, no dissonance, just crystal clarity that made listening to her a relief I hadn't known I needed. After her lecture, I waited until the crowd of admirers had dispersed before approaching her. "Your work on targeted acoustic stimulation is fascinating," I said, watching her closely. "Particularly the potential applications for treating auditory processing disorders." She smiled, her eyes assessing me with unexpected intensity. "You seem to understand the implications better than most first-year students. I have a personal interest in how sound affects perception." Something in her expression shifted, a momentary calculation that I might have missed if I hadn't been studying her so carefully. "Personal interest often drives the most innovative research," she said. "I'd be interested in hearing more about yours." That conversation led to coffee, which led to regular meetings, which eventually evolved into something more personal. Elise possessed a brilliant mind that matched her perfect resonance. She asked questions no one had ever thought to ask me, showed interest in aspects of my perception that I'd never shared with anyone. For the first time, I felt understood. 6 months into our relationship, I made a decision that would change everything. Sitting in her apartment, surrounded by the comfortable silence we'd come to enjoy together, I decided to trust her with my secret. "I can hear truth," I said simply. She looked up from her book, head tilted slightly. "What do you mean?" not, metaphorically. I literally hear when someone is speaking truthfully. It produces a specific resonance, a harmony that's unmistakable. Lies sound different, discordant, jarring. I expected skepticism, maybe even concern about my mental health. Instead, Elise set her book aside, leaning forward with genuine interest. "Tell me more." So I did. I explained how I'd experienced this ability since childhood, how it shaped my interactions and choices, how I'd learned to live with a sensitivity that no one else seemed to share. Throughout my explanation, Elise's questions were thoughtful, precise, approaching my experience with the same scientific rigor she applied to her research. "Have you ever tried to quantify these frequencies?" she asked. "To determine exactly what harmonics constitute truth in your perception?" The question hadn't occurred to me. "No. It's always been subjective, just my experience." "Would you be willing to explore it more systematically?" Her voice remained perfectly resonant, her enthusiasm genuine. This could revolutionize our understanding of human perception. Her interest was flattering, her approach respectful. For the first time, my ability felt like something valuable, rather than an isolating anomaly. When she suggested we conduct some informal experiments to better understand what I was experiencing, I agreed, without hesitation. The following week, Elise invited me to her private lab at the Institute. The space was immaculate, filled with equipment I recognized from my studies and other devices I couldn't identify. She explained that we would start with simple tests, playing different tones and frequencies while I described how they compared to what I experienced as truth resonance. "The goal is to create a baseline," she explained, attaching small sensors to my temples, "to understand exactly what you're hearing when you perceive truth." Those first sessions were illuminating. Elise's methodical approach helped me articulate aspects of my perception I'd never consciously examined. She documented everything meticulously, building what she called a frequency profile of my unique ability. As weeks passed, our experiments grew more complex. Elise introduced what she called interference patterns, combinations of tones designed to mimic the discord I associated with deception. She seemed particularly interested in the threshold between resonance and dissonance, the point at which truth began to sound like lies. "Fascinating," she murmured during our 17th session. "Your auditory discrimination is unlike anything in the literature. The neural pathways must be incredibly specialized." Her words resonated with perfect truth, her admiration seemingly genuine. If there was calculation behind her interest, it remained hidden beneath layers of authentic curiosity. I trusted her completely, grateful to have found someone who not only accepted my ability, but valued it. What I couldn't have known then was that Elise had been specifically trained to produce perfect resonance when speaking even partial truths. Her organization had spent years developing techniques to fool people exactly like me. Every question, every test, every moment of apparent intimacy was carefully calibrated to map my ability for one purpose: its eventual destruction. Our sessions at Elise's lab soon developed a routine. Twice weekly, I would arrive after my classes and she would have a new set of experiments prepared. What she called refinement sessions seemed designed to help me better understand and control my unique perception. "Today we're exploring the harmonic patterns of partial truths," she explained during our 37th session, adjusting a dial on one of her specialized machines. "These frequencies might help you detect more subtle forms of deception." I sat in the acoustically isolated chamber, wearing the neural monitoring headset that had become familiar. The equipment looked scientific and legitimate, with displays showing real-time analysis of brainwave patterns and auditory responses. Elise meticulously documented everything, building what appeared to be a comprehensive study of my perception. "Listen carefully to this sequence." Her voice came through the headphones. "Tell me which portions resonate as truth and which don't." The sound began as a pure tone that gradually shifted, introducing subtle variations and harmonics. I concentrated, trying to identify the exact moment when resonance gave way to dissonance. "There," I said, pressing the marker button. "It just shifted." "Excellent," Elise responded. Your sensitivity to frequency shift is remarkable. What I didn't realize then was that these tests were actually calibrated interference patterns designed to corrupt my ability. Each session subtly reshaping my neural pathways, blurring the once clear distinction between resonance and dissonance. The technology she used wasn't measuring my perception. It was actively altering it. After 3 months of regular sessions, I began experiencing inconsistencies. Walking across campus, I overheard a student clearly lying about completing an assignment, but the expected dissonance was muted, almost imperceptible. Later that week, my landlord truthfully explained a maintenance issue, yet his words carried a strange undertone that hadn't been there before. When I mentioned these changes to Elise during our next session, she showed no surprise. Your perception is becoming more nuanced, she explained, making notes on her tablet. The binary of truth and falsehood is giving way to a more sophisticated understanding. This is progress. Her words still carried resonance, but for the first time I noticed something else beneath them, a subtle frequency I couldn't quite identify. Not dissonance exactly, but not the pure harmony I'd come to associate with her speech. Is that normal? I asked. To lose clarity rather than gain it? Absolutely, she assured me. Think of it like training your palate. A child tastes only sweet or bitter, but an experienced taster perceives complex flavor profiles. Your auditory perception is developing similar complexity. The explanation made logical sense, and yet something felt wrong. The world had begun to sound different, muddied, confused. Where once I had navigated with confidence following the clear signposts of resonance and dissonance, now I hesitated, uncertain of what I was hearing. Still, I trusted Elise. Her research credentials were impeccable, her methods seemingly rigorous. If she said this was normal development, who was I to question her expertise? So the sessions continued, and with each one, the distinct tones that had guided me since childhood grew fainter, less reliable. 6 months into our refinement process, Elise's institute held a fundraising gala. As her research partner, I was expected to attend. The event was held in the institute's grand atrium, filled with wealthy donors and academic luminaries. Elise moved through the crowd with practiced grace, explaining her work in terms tailored to inspire both intellectual interest and financial support. I stood at the periphery, uncomfortable with the cacophony of social niceties and strategic exaggerations that such events always produced. My once reliable ability to filter this noise had diminished, leaving me overwhelmed by competing sounds that I could no longer categorize with certainty. Near the end of the evening, I decided to find a quiet spot to recover my composure. As I approached a secluded corridor leading to the research offices, I heard voices from around the corner, Elise and Dr. Mercer, the institute's director. The neutralization is nearly complete, Elise was saying. Another month and his ability will be permanently compromised. The treatment is irreversible. Excellent work, Mercer responded. The board will be pleased. His type of verification ability posed a significant risk. He still has no idea, Elise continued. The cover story about refinement has been completely effective. For the first time in months, I heard something with absolute clarity. A pure, unmistakable dissonance in Elise's voice that cut through the confusion of my damaged perception. In that moment, everything crystallized. Every inconsistency, every explanation, every refinement session revealed its true purpose. I wasn't being helped. I was being systematically destroyed. I retreated silently, returning to the gala with my face carefully composed while my mind raced. I played my part for the remainder of the evening, smiling at appropriate moments, nodding at introductions, all while the truth thundered through me with devastating force. That night, after the other guests had left, I confronted Elise in her lab. She was still there, updating her notes on our latest session. "You're destroying my ability deliberately," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Why?" She looked up, startled by my direct approach. For a moment I thought she might deny it, but something in my expression must have told her the pretense was over. "You were identified as a verification risk," she explained with clinical detachment. setting aside her tablet. Your ability poses a threat to certain necessary operations. I was assigned to neutralize that threat. You mean you were ordered to break me? I responded. I prefer to think of it as recalibrating an anomaly, she said. Your perception was never supposed to exist. We're simply correcting a neurological aberration. Who is we? The Institute? The Institute is merely one branch of a larger organization, Elise said. There are structures in place to maintain certain balances in society. People with abilities like yours disrupt those balances. By detecting lies, I said flatly. By introducing an unpredictable variable into carefully managed systems, she corrected. Surely you understand that some deception is necessary for functional governance, international relations, even basic social cohesion. I stared at her, searching for any sign of the woman I thought I'd known, the one whose words had once resonated with perfect truth. There was nothing there but cold efficiency. How many others have you done this to? I asked. You're not as unique as you think, she replied. Though your particular form of auditory truth perception was unusually strong, it presented quite the technical challenge. And our relationship? Was that part of the technical challenge too? A flicker of something, not quite regret, perhaps professional pride, crossed her face. Proximity was necessary for consistent treatment. The relationship provided convenient access. Each word struck like a physical blow, all pretense of resonance gone from her voice. This was Elise without the mask, clinical and detached, discussing the systematic destruction of my perception as if it were nothing more than an interesting research problem. The process is nearly complete, she continued. Your ability will never function properly again. The neural pathways have been permanently altered. In time, you'll adjust to normal perception. Most subjects do. I looked around the lab, at the equipment that had been used to break me piece by piece, at the notes documenting my dismantling. Then I looked back at Elise, memorizing her face, committing to memory every detail of this moment. Thank you for your honesty, I said finally. It's the only true thing you've given me. I walked out of the lab, out of the institute, into the night. The world around me now existed in a perpetual state of auditory ambiguity, truth and lies blending into an indistinguishable cacophony that offered no guidance, only noise. My unique connection to reality had been severed, leaving me adrift, in a sea of uncertainty. But as I walked away from everything I'd trusted, one thing became absolutely clear. This would not be the end. It would be the beginning. The weeks following my confrontation with Elise passed in a fog of disorientation. Without my ability to distinguish truth from falsehood through sound, I felt like a blind man suddenly stripped of his other heightened senses. Conversations became exhausting puzzles, each interaction a minefield of potential deception that I could no longer navigate instinctively. But beneath the confusion, a cold clarity was taking shape. Elise and her organization had identified my perception as a threat and methodically destroyed it. They had weaponized sound against me, using my trust as the access point for their attack. If I wanted to understand what had been done to me, if I wanted any hope of fighting back, I needed to understand their weapons better than they did. I withdrew from my acoustic engineering program at the university and applied to a specialized doctoral program in psychoacoustics at a research institution across the country. My application included a proposal for studying neurological responses to targeted frequency manipulation, deliberately echoing the techniques that had been used against me. When the acceptance came along with a research stipend, I felt the first glimmer of purpose since my ability had been damaged. I wasn't simply fleeing, I was beginning a transformation. Your proposal is ambitious, commented Dr. Werner during our first advisory meeting. Most students take years to develop such theoretical precision. I have a personal interest in the subject, I replied, the understatement almost making me smile. My studies became my obsession. While other doctoral candidates maintained balanced lives with friends and hobbies, I immersed myself completely in research. Every paper on acoustic neurological impact, every experiment on frequency modulation, Every breakthrough in psychoacoustics brought me closer to understanding the weapon that had been used against me. I specialized in the intersection of sound and neuroplasticity, how auditory stimuli could reshape neural pathways. My colleagues found my focus impressive. They didn't realize it was fueled by a singular purpose that consumed me day and night. In my private research, I went beyond published studies, conducting experiments that pushed the boundaries of established science. I developed models for how specific frequency patterns could target particular neural networks, how sustained exposure could create permanent changes in perception. Everything Elise had done to me, I dissected and improved upon, turning her methods into a foundation for something far more sophisticated. By the time I completed my first doctorate 3 years later, I understood not just what Elise had done, but how to enhance her techniques. My dissertation on perceptual recalibration through targeted acoustic stimulation was published in leading journals, establishing me as an emerging authority in the field. The irony wasn't lost on me. My work was being celebrated by the same academic community that had facilitated my destruction. Rather than stopping there, I immediately began a second doctoral program, this one focused on the delivery systems for acoustic manipulation. The question wasn't just how sound could alter perception, but how it could be directed with precision, how environments could be engineered to affect specific individuals while leaving others untouched. "Your focus is remarkable," Dr. Yamamoto, my new advisor, observed. "Most researchers would be content with your existing contributions." "I believe we've only scratched the surface of what's possible," I replied. In my laboratory, I developed prototypes that could induce specific emotional and perceptual states through precisely calibrated sound waves. I created ambient speakers so subtle they were practically undetectable, directional audio systems that could follow a specific individual through a space, introducing tailored distortions that accumulated over time. My research attracted attention from institutes similar to the one where Elise had worked. They saw theoretical applications. I was building practical tools with a very specific purpose in mind. "Your work on individualized acoustic environments is groundbreaking," said the director of the National Acoustic Research Laboratory, offering me a position after I completed my second doctorate. "Particularly your theory on permanent perceptual recalibration." I accepted with a polite smile, knowing that what they saw as theoretical was already functional. In my private lab, I had moved beyond prototypes to working systems capable of creating what I had come to think of as echo chambers, environments where an individual's perception could be systematically altered until they could no longer distinguish between reality and manufactured distortion. Every breakthrough brought me closer to the instrument of retribution I was crafting. I wasn't building weapons for hypothetical use. I was composing a very specific symphony, Elise's downfall. Throughout these years, I monitored her career from a distance. She had continued to rise in her field, eventually becoming research director at the Global Institute for Perceptual Studies, a prestigious position that gave her significant influence over how perception itself was understood and studied. The irony of someone who deliberately corrupted perception being in charge of studying it wasn't lost on me. I tracked her publications, her speaking engagements, the grants her team received. I studied the organizational structure of her institute, identifying the security systems they used, the technologies they employed, the protocols they followed. I wasn't gathering this information haphazardly. I was preparing for an infiltration that would need to be flawless. 7 years after Elise had destroyed my natural ability, I had transformed myself into something she would never recognize. Not just physically, with my deliberate changes in appearance, but fundamentally. The trusting student she had manipulated was gone, replaced by a methodical architect of acoustic manipulation whose understanding now surpassed her own. My damaged perception, rather than being a weakness, had become the foundation for a new kind of awareness. I could no longer hear truth as natural resonance, but I had learned to recognize it through other means. Micro-expressions, speech patterns, physiological responses that I had trained myself to detect. More importantly, I had developed technologies, that could induce in others the same perceptual distortion that had been forced upon me. The final component of my preparation came in the form of voice modulation technology. I developed systems that could alter my vocal patterns at a fundamental frequency level, not just changing how I sounded, but restructuring the harmonic components of my speech to create a voice Elise would never connect to the student she had betrayed. In my private laboratory, I tested my completed systems, confirming what years of research had suggested. I could create environments where perception itself became malleable, where the line between truth and falsehood blurred until it disappeared entirely. I could build perfect, inescapable echo chambers tailored to specific individuals. System calibration complete, my computer announced after the final test sequence. Target-specific acoustic profile ready for deployment. I stood in the center of my laboratory, surrounded by the culmination of 7 years of single-minded purpose. Everything I had lost had been transformed into something new. Not a restoration of what was taken, but the creation of something more powerful. My ability to hear truth had been destroyed, but in its place I had gained the power to shape how others perceived reality itself. The time had come to return to Elise's world, not as the victim I had been, but as something she had never anticipated. The master of the very weapons she had used against me, perfected beyond anything she could imagine. I applied for a consulting position with the Global Institute when they announced a collaborative project on environmental acoustic influence, a euphemism for the very manipulation techniques her organization had pioneered. My credentials were impeccable, my expertise unmatched. When the acceptance came with Elise's electronic signature at the bottom, I felt a cold satisfaction. The game was about to begin. Not a confrontation, not a revelation, but a slow, methodical composition of justice that she wouldn't even recognize until it was complete. I would enter her world not as an enemy, but as a colleague, not seeking dramatic revenge, but constructing around her the same perceptual prison she had built for me, one sound wave at a time. My first day at the Global Institute was an exercise in restraint. As I walked through the sleek glass doors beneath the Institute's imposing logo, I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Anger at returning to the world that had broken me, satisfaction at how thoroughly I had transformed myself, and cold anticipation for what would unfold over the coming months. The receptionist smiled professionally. "Dr. Reed, welcome to the Institute. Dr. Mercer is expecting you for the initial orientation. Then you'll be meeting with our research director, Dr. Elise Caldwell." I returned her smile with practiced ease. "Thank you. I'm looking forward to the collaboration." Dr. Mercer hadn't changed much in 7 years. Still the same imposing figure with calculating eyes that assessed everything as an asset or liability. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? The nervous student he had discussed neutralizing no longer existed in any recognizable form. "Your work on targeted acoustic environments is exceptional," he said, as he led me through the facility. "When we saw your application for the collaborative project, it was an immediate yes from the entire committee." "I'm honored," I replied, modulating my voice to the specific frequency pattern I had designed for this role. "Your institute's reputation for innovation is unmatched." The tour ended at the main research lab where several scientists were calibrating equipment. Among them stood Elise. 7 years had treated her well. Her position as research director had brought with it the polished confidence of someone accustomed to authority. Her hair was shorter now, styled with professional precision, but her eyes still held that same clinical intensity I remembered. "Dr. Caldwell," Mercer called out. "Your new collaborator has arrived. This is Dr. Kaylin Reed." She turned, extending her hand with a professional smile that revealed nothing. "Dr. Reed, your papers on perceptual recalibration have been quite influential in our recent work. I'm looking forward to seeing what we can accomplish together." I clasped her hand briefly, my pulse steady despite the moment's significance. "The feeling is mutual, Dr. Caldwell. I believe we have much to learn from each other." Her eyes met mine without a flicker of recognition. The student she had methodically destroyed no longer existed in her perception, replaced by a colleague whose voice, appearance, and demeanor bore no connection to the person she had betrayed. Over the next week, I immersed myself in the Institute's culture. I attended meetings, reviewed ongoing projects, and began to identify the perfect placement points for my systems. As the newest consultant on environmental acoustics, I had the perfect cover for installing specialized equipment throughout the facility. We'll need baseline measurements of the current acoustic environment, I explained during a project meeting. I've developed sensors that can capture subtle variations in ambient sound that might be influencing perception without conscious awareness. Fascinating approach, Elise commented. Where would you want to place them? Ideally in all primary work areas, the main research labs, conference rooms, even the cafeteria and break rooms. Human perception doesn't turn off in informal spaces. Often that's where it's most vulnerable to influence. She nodded, impressed by the thoroughness of my methodology. Make whatever arrangements you need with facilities. They'll help with the installation. My sensors were indeed capable of measuring acoustic patterns, but their primary function was far more sophisticated. Each device contained miniaturized versions of the technology I had spent years perfecting, systems capable of introducing subtle frequency patterns designed to induce specific psychological responses. Once installed, they would allow me to gradually alter the acoustic environment throughout the Institute, with particular focus on spaces Elise frequented. The installation process took 3 weeks, during which I maintained the role of the dedicated scientist, impressing my new colleagues with insights and suggestions for their ongoing research. I was particularly careful around Elise, keeping our interactions professional but not distant, building the foundation of collegial respect that would make my later moves less suspicious. Your approach to frequency mapping is innovative, she commented after a particularly productive session analyzing perception thresholds. It reminds me of work I did years ago, though your methods are more refined. All research builds on what came before, I replied. I'm sure I've been influenced by your published work, even if indirectly. She smiled, pleased by the acknowledgement. Science is always a conversation across time. If she only knew which particular conversation was about to continue. With my systems in place, I began the first phase of my plan, subtle manipulations so minor they existed just at the threshold of perception. In Elise's office, I calibrated the ambient sound to introduce minimal distortions when certain emotional triggers were present: stress, confidence, security. Nothing she would consciously notice, just enough to create a subliminal sense of discord. In conference rooms, I programmed the systems to subtly alter the acoustic reflection of her colleagues' voices when they addressed her directly. Not enough to change the content, just enough to introduce a barely perceptible dissonance that would create subconscious doubt about their sincerity. The cafeteria received special attention, a space where guards were naturally lower. There, the ambient noise patterns were engineered to subtly reinforce feelings of isolation when she was present, creating a subtle but persistent sense of separation from her colleagues. I monitored the effects through the same sensors that delivered the manipulations, tracking subtle changes in speech patterns, micro-expressions, and behavioral indicators. Each day brought new data, new opportunities for calibration, new ways to refine my approach. 2 months into the project, the first signs of effectiveness appeared. During a presentation to the board, Elise hesitated slightly when challenged by a question, a momentary uncertainty I had never observed in her before. Later that week, she asked for clarification during a routine meeting, something the supremely confident director rarely needed. Have you noticed anything strange about the acoustics in the East Wing? One of her researchers asked during a calibration session. No, Elise responded, though I observed the slight tension in her posture. Why do you ask? Just a feeling, the researcher replied. Like something's slightly off, but I can't place it. Elise frowned slightly. Run diagnostics on the environmental systems. Maybe there's an issue with the ventilation affecting sound propagation. I volunteered to assist with the diagnostics, of course. My sensors might pick up anomalies standard equipment would miss, I offered helpfully. The investigation found nothing because there was nothing conventional instruments could detect. My systems operated at frequencies and patterns specifically designed to evade standard measurement while still affecting human perception. As weeks passed, I gradually intensified the effects in spaces Elise frequented most often. The manipulations remained subtle, imperceptible changes in harmony and dissonance, carefully calibrated to create cumulative effects rather than immediate reactions. This wasn't about dramatic confrontation. It was about composition, a symphony of justice playing out one note at a time. I watched her with clinical detachment, cataloging every reaction, every sign of growing discomfort, the slight furrow in her brow when entering her office, the way she would occasionally tilt her head as if listening for something just beyond hearing, the increasing frequency with which she would ask colleagues to repeat themselves. 3 months into my infiltration, I had become a valued member of the Institute. My insights were sought after, my expertise respected. Elise herself had begun to rely on my input for key projects, unaware that with every interaction, every shared space, every collaborative session, she was being drawn deeper into my carefully constructed echo chamber. "Your work here has been exemplary," she told me after a particularly successful presentation to potential donors. "I hope you'll consider extending your collaboration beyond the initial project timeline." I smiled, the perfect mask of professional gratitude. I can't imagine a more stimulating environment. The work we're doing here matters. On that point, at least I wasn't lying. The work did matter, just not in the way she believed. With each passing day, my systems gathered more data, my calibrations became more precise, and Elise Caldwell moved one step closer to experiencing what she had inflicted on me, a world where perception itself could no longer be trusted, where reality dissolved into endless, disorienting echoes. 3 months into the collaboration, I decided it was time to elevate my approach. The ambient manipulations had established the foundation, creating subtle fissures in Elise's perception that were now ready to be exploited. For this next phase, I would introduce what I called reflective echoes, manipulated recordings of Elise's own voice, played back at frequencies only she could hear, creating a disorienting effect of constantly being contradicted by herself. The technology required for this was sophisticated, built on principles I had developed during my second doctorate. My systems had been recording and analyzing Elise's speech patterns since day one, building a comprehensive vocal profile. Now they would use that data to synthesize her voice saying things she never said, contradicting statements she had made, questioning her own conclusions. I calibrated the first set of echoes to activate in her office during periods of focused work. When she reviewed research data, her synthesized voice would whisper barely perceptible doubts about her methodology. When she prepared presentations, subtle contradictions would emerge between points, all delivered at frequencies specifically tuned to her unique auditory profile, ensuring no one else in the room would hear them. The effects manifested more quickly than I had anticipated. Within 2 weeks, Elise began showing unmistakable signs of stress. She would pause mid-sentence during meetings, as if distracted by something no one else could hear. She began double-checking her work obsessively, questioning conclusions that she would have confidently asserted before. "Dr. Caldwell, are you feeling all right?" Dr. Mercer asked after she stumbled through a presentation to the board of directors. "You seem distracted lately." "I'm fine," she insisted, though her hands trembled slightly as she gathered her materials. "Just some trouble sleeping." I watched this exchange with calculated concern on my face, while inside, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Sleep disruption was a predictable effect of the auditory manipulation, the same consequence I had experienced during the early stages of what Elise had done to me years ago. As her discomfort grew more obvious, I positioned myself as a supportive colleague, offering assistance with projects she was struggling to complete, stepping in when her focus wavered during important meetings. This allowed me to further integrate my systems into her daily routine, expanding the echo chamber I was constructing around her. The Institute's upcoming annual conference provided the perfect opportunity to intensify my approach. As a featured presenter, Elise would be under significant pressure to perform flawlessly. I volunteered to help prepare the auditorium's acoustic environment, installing my most advanced systems throughout the space. These will ensure optimal sound quality during the presentations, I explained to the technical team. The acoustics in large halls can be unpredictable. What they didn't know was that my systems would create a personalized acoustic environment specifically calibrated to Elise during her keynote address. As she spoke, her own words would be subtly distorted, in her perception, creating a jarring disconnect between what she was saying and what she was hearing. The day of the conference, Elise arrived looking already strained. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and the confident posture that had once seemed unshakable now appeared forced. I greeted her with professional concern. "Rough night?" I asked. "Just pre-presentation nerves," she replied, though we both knew Elise Caldwell had never suffered from performance anxiety in her life. Her keynote began well enough. The manipulation was designed to build gradually, starting with such subtle distortions that she could dismiss them as imagination. But as she reached the midpoint of her presentation, the effects intensified. I watched from the back of the auditorium as she began to hesitate, to lose her place, to glance uncertainly at her notes. To the audience, it might have appeared as simple fatigue or mild disorganization. To me, it was the visible manifestation of her perception beginning to fracture under precisely applied pressure. By the time she concluded, sweat beaded her forehead, and her final remarks were rushed as if she couldn't wait to escape the podium. In the aftermath of the conference, Elise's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She began canceling meetings, delegating responsibilities she would normally handle personally, isolating herself in her office for hours at a time. The rumors spread quickly through the institute. The brilliant Dr. Caldwell was burning out, perhaps facing a breakdown. During this period, I took the opportunity to explore areas of the institute that had previously been inaccessible to me. Using the security credentials I had gradually accumulated, I accessed restricted databases, confirming what I had long suspected. The organization's work extended far beyond theoretical research into perception. They had developed sophisticated techniques to influence decision-makers through targeted acoustic manipulation, subtle enough to avoid detection, powerful enough to shift opinions and policies. I found files detailing treatments for individuals with perceptual sensitivities like mine, people who could detect deception through various sensory means. The organization had systematically identified and neutralized dozens of such individuals over the years, seeing them as threats to what they called necessary information management. Most disturbing were the records of their work with government agencies and corporations, providing communication enhancement services that were, in reality, sophisticated methods of acoustic persuasion. They had been weaponizing perception itself, using techniques refined through the destruction of people like me. The discovery didn't change my plan. It vindicated it. My revenge against Elise wasn't just personal justice. It was the dismantling of a system that had harmed countless others, a system she had knowingly served and advanced. When Elise finally broke, it happened in my presence. She had taken a week of sudden leave, returning to the institute looking haggard, but determined to maintain control. I requested a private consultation regarding one of our collaborative projects, meeting her in her office late one evening when most staff had gone home. As we discussed acoustic mapping techniques, she suddenly clutched her head, a gesture I had been waiting for. "Something's wrong with me," she confessed, vulnerability breaking through her professional demeanor for the first time. "I keep hearing things, contradictions, echoes. Sometimes my own voice says things I never said." I maintained a perfect mask of concern. "That sounds distressing. How long has this been happening?" "Weeks, maybe months," she admitted. "It started so subtly, I thought I was imagining it. But it's getting worse, I can barely focus now." "Have you considered it might be related to past actions?" I asked carefully. "Guilt can manifest in unusual perceptual phenomena." She looked up sharply. "What would I have to feel guilty about?" "I wouldn't know," I responded, my voice calm. "But our perceptions often reflect our deeper truths." The comment landed precisely as intended. Doubt flickered across her face. The first crack in her certainty that her symptoms were purely physiological rather than psychological. The seed of her unraveling had been planted. "I should see a specialist," she said, more to herself than to me. "That seems wise," I agreed, "though I'd be happy to help in any way I can. My research might offer some insights into what you're experiencing." She nodded gratefully, completely unaware that she was turning to the architect of her distress for salvation. "I would appreciate that. You've become one of the few people here I can still trust." The irony of her statement brought me no pleasure, only a cold confirmation that my plan was working exactly as designed. The woman who had systematically destroyed my perception was now experiencing her own perceptual collapse, turning for help to the very person she had once broken. As I left her office that evening, I activated the final calibrations on my systems throughout the facility. The manipulations would now follow specific emotional triggers in Elise's speech and behavior, intensifying when she expressed confidence, easing when she showed doubt, a perceptual prison that would adapt to her every attempt to escape it, reflecting back her own patterns of deception. She had taken everything from me, my ability, my trust, my connection to truth itself. Now I would take her certainty, her confidence, her very grip on reality. Not through dramatic confrontation, but through the slow, methodical application of the very techniques she had pioneered. The echo chamber was nearly complete. Elise's deterioration accelerated rapidly after our conversation. She took an immediate leave of absence, informing the institute she needed time for medical consultation. I had anticipated this move and prepared accordingly. The most sophisticated of my devices had already been installed in her home months earlier, disguised as gift electronics, security upgrades, and smart home enhancements that I had arranged to have delivered through various professional connections. The acoustic environment I had constructed would follow her everywhere now, making distance from the institute irrelevant. Her home, meant to be her sanctuary, would offer no respite from the perceptual distortion I had engineered. During her absence, I consolidated my position at the institute. With Elise temporarily removed, I became the de facto authority on several key projects, including the very ones that had once been used to identify and neutralize people with abilities like mine. The irony wasn't lost on me as I subtly redirected research priorities, altered methodologies, and introduced subtle flaws into their detection systems. I also used this time to prepare the final phase of my plan. The system of evidence distribution I had designed was elegant in its simplicity. All the files I had discovered, documenting the organization's manipulation of public figures, their acoustic coercion techniques, their deliberate destruction of perceptual anomalies, were duplicated, encrypted, and placed in secure servers programmed to release their contents to regulatory authorities, journalists, and ethics committees simultaneously at my command. 3 weeks into her leave, Elise returned to the institute. The woman who walked through the doors barely resembled the confident research director who had built her career on destroying people like me. Her appearance was disheveled, her movements hesitant. The medical specialists had found nothing physically wrong with her, leaving her with no explanation for the perceptual distortions that were steadily eroding her grip on reality. I watched from my office as she made her way through the main atrium, colleagues greeting her with concerned smiles that did little to mask their discomfort at her transformation. When she reached her office, I gave her an hour to settle before making my approach. "Welcome back," I said, standing in her doorway with a carefully constructed expression of professional concern. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she lied, the word hollow even without my former ability to hear its dissonance. "The time away was helpful." "I'm glad to hear it," I responded. "The team has missed your guidance." Her eyes darted around the room as if searching for something just out of sight. "Did you need something specific, Dr. Reed?" "Actually, I wanted to discuss some anomalous findings in our collaborative research. Something that might interest you, given your current situation." Her attention sharpened immediately. "What do you mean?" "May I come in? This is somewhat sensitive." She nodded, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. I closed the door behind me, ensuring our privacy for what would come next. During your absence, I've been reviewing historical data from some of the Institute's earlier projects, I began. I found something interesting about perceptual manipulation techniques, particularly those involving acoustic stimulation. Go on, she said, a hint of her old clinical interest surfacing. The records show cases of individuals experiencing symptoms remarkably similar to what you've described. Auditory hallucinations, contradictory perceptions, a growing inability to distinguish between actual sounds and manufactured ones. She leaned forward. What caused it? According to the files, these were subjects who had been exposed to targeted, acoustic manipulation over extended periods. The techniques were designed to alter perception permanently. That's impossible, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Those projects were theoretical. We never implemented them at that scale. I smiled slightly. Are you certain? The documentation seems quite detailed. Project Resonance, for example, specifically targeted individuals with unusual perceptual abilities, particularly those related to detecting deception through sensory means. Her face paled visibly. How do you know about Project Resonance? Those files are restricted. I have access to many things now, Dr. Caldwell, including records of your work with a subject 7 years ago, a young man with an unusual ability to perceive truth through auditory resonance. The moment had arrived. I watched recognition dawn in her eyes, spreading across her features like a slow, cold wave. She stared at me, really seeing me for the first time since I had returned to her world. Kaylin, she whispered, the name sounding strange after so long. In the flesh, I confirmed, though as you noted in your final report, not quite the same. Subject's unique perceptual ability has been successfully neutralized. Those were your exact words, weren't they? She pushed back from her desk, instinctively, creating distance. How is this possible? You look completely different. Necessity is quite the motivator, I replied. You destroyed my ability to hear truth. I had to find other ways to distinguish reality from deception. You don't understand, she began, falling back on the same defense she had attempted years ago. I was following orders. Your ability posed a threat to necessary operations. Orders, I echoed. Yes, I know all about the orders. I found the files, Elise. Your organization, your methods, your targets, everything. Her eyes widened with genuine fear now. What have you done? A more precise question would be, what have I done to you? I leaned forward slightly. Have you enjoyed experiencing what you inflicted on me? The gradual erosion of perceptual reliability, the growing inability to trust what you hear, the constant maddening uncertainty. Understanding transformed her expression as pieces fell into place. The acoustic anomalies, the voices, it was you all along. I've created a perfect reflection, I explained calmly. Everything you've experienced is a mirror of what you did to me, but with improvements. My techniques are more refined, more permanent. The auditory distortions you're experiencing aren't going to stop, Elise. You'll never hear truth clearly again. Every statement will carry dissonance. Every silence will be filled with echoes of your own deceptions. As she processed this, I activated the final phase of my plan with a simple command on my phone. Throughout the facility, carefully planted evidence began transmitting to regulatory authorities, journalists, and ethics committees. The organization's manipulation of public figures, their acoustic coercion techniques, their deliberate destruction of perceptual anomalies, all exposed simultaneously. Alarms began to sound throughout the building. Security protocols activated automatically as external servers detected the mass data breach. In the growing chaos, I remained perfectly calm. Your organization is being dismantled as we speak, I told her. But your private echo chamber will continue long after they're gone. A personalized acoustic environment that only you can hear, calibrated specifically to your neural patterns. You can't do this, she protested weakly, though we both knew it was already done. I already have, I said, just as you already did. The Institute's security system announced a lockdown as external authorities began to arrive. Through the glass walls of her office, we could see staff moving rapidly through corridors, confusion and panic spreading as information systems went offline and secured areas were automatically sealed. "They'll figure it out," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "They'll find your devices, neutralize whatever you've done to me." I shook my head. "The technology doesn't work that way. What I've done isn't based on external devices anymore. I've induced permanent neurological changes through sustained acoustic stimulation, just as you did to me. The difference is my methods are more advanced. There's nothing to find, nothing to remove. The changes are within you now." Her face crumpled as the full implications registered. "Why not just expose us? Why do this to me personally?" "Justice requires symmetry," I replied simply. "You didn't just expose me when you identified my ability. You deliberately destroyed it, leaving me permanently altered. Now you'll live with a similar alteration, unable to trust what you hear, questioning every sound, every voice, including your own." Security personnel appeared at her door, expressions urgent. "Dr. Caldwell, we need to evacuate immediately. The building is being secured by federal authorities." As they led her away, her eyes remained locked on mine, filled with the dawning horror of someone who finally understood the cage they had been placed in. A cage with no visible bars, no tangible restraints, just the endless, inescapable distortion of their own perception. I followed calmly as the evacuation proceeded, playing my role as a concerned colleague, caught in unexpected circumstances. Outside the institute, chaos reigned as vehicles with various agency markings arrived, personnel in tactical gear securing entrances and establishing perimeters. In the midst of it all, I caught a final glimpse of Elise being escorted to a separate vehicle, presumably for immediate questioning about the exposed operations. Her posture was broken, her movements unsteady. Even amidst the sensory overload of alarms and shouted orders, I knew she was experiencing her own private cacophony, a personalized dissonance that would follow her long after today's events had concluded. For me, there was no sense of triumph or elation, just the cold certainty of completion. As I walked away from the scene, passing through the security checkpoint with my credentials still intact, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 7 years. Silence. Not the disorienting silence of my damaged perception, but the quiet of a resolved dissonance, a completed composition. My ability to hear truth as resonance remained lost, that unique connection to reality permanently severed by Elise's systematic destruction. But in its place, I had gained something perhaps more valuable, the mastery of perception itself, and the knowledge that those who had weaponized sound against me had been silenced by their own echoes. The world was still a place of uncertain sounds for me, truth and lies indistinguishable through my damaged perception. But I had learned to navigate through other means, to build new ways of discerning reality. And now Elise would learn as well, trapped forever in the echo chamber of her own making, hearing nothing but the distorted reflections of a truth she had tried to control.